Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Good morning, Shubhodaya to everyone. This is Nitin Sridhar, and I welcome you all to another session of Weekend with Wisdom with Kumari Manjushri Hegde. Yesterday, we saw a very enlightening session wherein she explained the Nyaya Vaisheshika system in great detail, and she enlightened us with the nuances about these two philosophical systems. And today she will be taking up yoga and Sankhya, so the darshanas. These are very fundamental to our Hindu worldview. When we speak of what makes Indian perspective different from the Western perspective, we often do not know what Indian perspective stands for. It is these darshanas. Darshana, as she yesterday noted, literally means worldview, drishti, and only when we say we need to revive Indian drishti, Indic drishti or Hindu drishti, it means we have to revive these darshanas, and we have to make an attempt to live according to these darshanas, to perceive and analyze even modern subjects, modern technologies, and everything that we have today using these categories. So let us now today understand more about the darshanas. Once again, a very warm welcome to you, Manjushri, and thank you for coming on our platform. Please start your session. Viewers, if you have any questions, please drop it on question and answer box, and she will take it up at the end of the session. Yeah, please start.
Thank you so much, Nitin. Wonderful opening remarks, which is absolutely true. I concur with it 100%. So yesterday we did see a little bit of Nyaya and Vaisheshika. Originally, I did plan to do the Shad Darshanas. But then I realized that if I have to fit in all of them into the limited time that we have, then I won't be able to do justice to any of them. So I decided that we could do Sankhya and Yoga today. Both are fascinating systems of philosophy on their own, and that's still 4 out of 6 darshanas. So it's not a bad deal, I hope. So I hope you don't mind. I will come back to all of them at the end, like we'll have a little bit of time that we can have an overview of all the 6 darshanas. But for main session, we'll concentrate on Sankhya and Yoga. Just share my screen with you. See, I won't dwell on the history of the 2 systems because there's a lot of discussions, ambiguity about what exactly is the Sankhya mentioned in, say, the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, in the Mahabharata, especially the portion of Moksha Dharma. What exactly is meant by Sankhya and Yoga, say, in the Bhagavad Gita? Is this a reference to the system of philosophy? Is it a more general use of the term? The debates, they're ongoing. And although Sankhya and Yoga are allied systems, I want to talk about them separately. So I'll start with Sankhya. Traditionally, Kapila Maharshi is said to have communicated the Sankhya teachings to a disciple named Asuri out of compassion for the suffering humanity. And Asuri in turn transmitted them to Panchashikha. And by Panchashikha, they were widely disseminated. Etat pavityamagyam munir asurayena kampaya pradadau. Asurirapi panchashikhayatena cha bahulīkritam tantram. Shishya paramparayagatam Ishvara Krishnena chaitad aryabhi sankshiptam aryamatina samyak vijñāya siddhantam. This is what Ishvara Krishna says in his Sankhya Karikas. So Kapila Maharshi communicated it to Asuri. Asuri taught Panchashikha, and the unbroken lineage of Shishya Parampara has continued. We hear the names of renowned teachers of Sankhya like Vindhyavasa, Vrishyaganga, Jaigishavya. Unfortunately, we do not have any of these texts today. The primary text of Sankhya is Ishvara Krishna's Sankhya Karika, dated to approximately the 5th century. Note that these are the Sankhya Karikas, not sutra but Karikas. Karikas are in the form of shlokas, not sutras. So there are about 72, sometimes 73 shlokas in this text, each expressing one or more siddhanta. There's no argumentative support for the propositions of the siddhanta within the text because it is not bhashya or a vada grantha. But the text as a whole constitutes a comprehensive philosophical vision. There's so many bhashyas have been written on these karikas. I think at least 8 early commentaries have survived. The Yukti Deepika, the Gaudapadha's Sankhya Karika Bhashya, Suvarna Saptati. You have Narayana Tirtha's Sankhya Chandrika, Vachaspati Mishra's Sankhya Tattva Kaumudi. But we do not have any texts that predate the Sankhya Karikas. For centuries, this text has been the definitive text of Sankhya tradition. So the term Sankhya is derived from the root kya prakathani, which is to explain, to elucidate, together with the prefix sam, so samyak khyati, the right to correct knowledge. Sankhya also means number, so Sankhya means relating to number or enumeration. So enumeration of the 23 principles born out of Prakriti. So Sankhya is that school or system which emphasizes the enumeration of principles or evolutes. So Vijnana Bhikshu will write, Sankhyam prakurvate chaiva prakatim cha prachakshate tattvani cha chaturvimshat tena Sankhyam prakirtitam. This is how he explains it. So we will look into the philosophical vision of Sankhya. The very first karika of Ishvara Krishna states, Dukkhatrayabhighata jijnasa tat abhighatake hetau drishte sa partha chet naikantatyantato bhavat. This is the first karika of Ishvara Krishna. Dukkhatrayabhighata. The Dukkhatraya is of 3 types of Adhyatmika, Adhibhautika and Adhidaivika, which can roughly be translated into internal, external and supernatural. So Dukkhatrayabhighata. Abhighata is literally like the beatings that comes from the root hana himsa vityoho. So abhihanti, the torment by Dukkhatraya, literally went out of shape because of the suffering. So from this suffering, Dukkhatraya abhighata, comes jidnyasa, a desire to understand how to end this Dukkhatraya. That apaghatake hetau. Apaghata is to destroy. Apaghatake hetau, the means to destroy, to end the Dukkhatraya. There arises a desire to understand the means to end suffering. So in the very first karika, Ishvara Krishna states the objective of Sankhya, of this system of philosophy. It is an inquiry into the elimination of suffering, of human suffering. Because the fundamental assumption is that existence is characterized by dukkha. It cannot be eliminated by any other means. Drishte sa partha che naikantatyantato bhava. If you say that such an inquiry is superfluous, not necessary, since other visible means exist, maybe drugs, medicines, other remedies, solutions for dukkha exist. No. Drishte sa partha che na. Because such means do not deliver from misery absolutely and finally. So absolute and final deliverance is through Viveka. Viveka of what? Viveka of Prakriti and Purusha. Vyakta Vyaktajna Vijnana. Discrimination between Vyakta, Avyakta and the node. See, the fundamental metaphysical distinction of Sankhya is between, on the one hand, the self or the conscious subject, and on the other hand, that which is experienced. So roughly speaking, we can call these 2 factors the subjective and the objective principles, or simply the subject and the object. But it must be remembered that they become subject and object only in relation to one another. Considered independently of that relation, they are merely potentially subject and potentially object. So in the Sankhya, 2 principles are Purusha. The subject is Purusha and the object is called Prakriti or Pradhana or Avyakta. See, the Yoga Sutras uses terms like Drashtra and Drishya more often than Purusha and Prakriti. but the basic distinction remains the same. In Sankhya, the sanyoga between these two fundamental principles, Prakriti and Purusha, the sanyoga between the two initiates the transformation of Prakriti into its manifest forms. And it is the dawning of Purusha's knowledge of his non-identity with the manifest forms. When Purusha awakens to his self-sufficiency and purity, this is Kaivalya. The fully awakened state is called as Kaivalya, literally Kevalasya Bhavaha, aloneness or solitude. Further, the very purpose of Prakriti's manifestation, and therefore of the whole of life and experience, is to bring about the conditions in which this awakening can occur. Okay, so we'll look into this in a slightly more detailed manner. See, according to the Sankhya model, the whole of reality is reduced ultimately to two fundamental principles, Purusha and Prakriti. Remember, in Vaisheshika had 6 categories. The whole of reality was fitted into 6 boxes. Bhava is the 7th category, later addition in the tradition, but you get the point. In Sankhya, fundamentally 2 principles only, Prakriti and Purusha. Purusha is the conscious subject and Prakriti, the non-conscious, originally unmanifest. See, matter is a very bad translation. The idea is like this. In the presence of consciousness, in the presence of Purusha, Prakriti is said to manifest. In the absence of consciousness, that is in itself, Prakriti remains unmanifest. So it's difficult to convey the idea of Prakriti in its unmanifest aspect. It cannot be characterized as stuff. See, the usual translations are nature and matter. These are useful as general designations, but they must not be confused with our current understandings of nature and matter. The best, closest expression to convey this idea of Prakriti is an undifferentiated plenitude of being. So it's an awkward expression, but just to remind you that Prakriti is not ordinary matter like earth, air. It does not occupy space, and space itself is a product of Prakriti. So it is material only in the sense that it is not conscious. Okay, so we'll understand this better as we go forward. So in the presence of Purusha, Prakriti manifests into 23 principles. 23 principles derive in some way from the sanyoga of Prakriti and Purusha. Sanyoga is not direct contact. It is the mere presence, the sannidhi of Purusha. The way a lotus blooms in the presence of sunlight or moonlight, the presence is sufficient. So here also the presence of Purusha, the sannidhi of Purusha, the Prakriti will manifest into 23 principles. So these 23 derivatives are generally described as products or evolutes of Prakriti because they emerge or arise when the equilibrium of the 3 gunas, the threefold constitution of Prakriti, when this is disturbed by the sannidhi of Purusha. So by the mere presence of Purusha, the equilibrium of Prakriti is disturbed and it results in creation, the manifestation of the 23 evolutes. The 23 evolutes are Buddhi or Mahat, Ahankara, Manas, the 5 Jnanendriyas, the 5 Karmendriyas, the 5 Tanmatras, and the 5 elements, the Panchabhutas. You add all of this, you get 23. So here is a sort of vertical evolution, meaning the 5 elements, the Panchabhuta, are evolutes of the Pancha Tanmatras. That is, they emerge from the Pancha Tanmatras. Panchabhuta from the Pancha Tanmatras. The Pancha Tanmatra and the 11 Indriya, Manas, 5 Jnanendriya, 5 Karmendriya, that is 11 Indriya, are the evolutes of Ahankara. They emerge from Ahankara. Ahankara emerges from Buddhi or Mahat. And Buddhi or Mahat is the direct manifestation of Prakriti. So Prakriti from Prakriti Mahat, from Mahat Ahankara, from Ahankara the 11 Indriyas and 5 Tanmatras, and from the 5 Tanmatras, the 5 Panchamahabhutas. Okay. So Ishvara Krishna writes, let me just change the slide for you. Ishvara Krishna writes, Prakriter Mahasato Tasmad Ganashta Shodashakaha, Tasmadapi Shodashaka, Pancha Bhutani. If you look at the figure, the arrangement is hierarchical. Okay? And the principle behind this arrangement is that each higher subsystem is progressively more inclusive. Ahankara includes the 21 evolutes. Mahat includes the 22 evolutes and Prakriti includes all the 23 evolutes. This is exactly what is meant by Satkaryavada in Sankhya. Ishvara Krishna says, Asad akarana akaranat upadana grahanat sarva sambhava bhavat shaktasya shaktakaranat karana bhavat karyam. All phenomena are considered as transformations, parinama of the one and the same substratum, that is the Prakriti. The technical designation of this particular theorem is called Prakriti Parinamavada. It is one of the four major theoretical positions on the issue of causality as developed in the Indian philosophy. See, first is the view of Nyaya and Vaisheshika schools of thought. It is called as Arambhavada. According to this, the eternal atoms, by continual recombination, the atoms recombine to create the multiform universe. Okay, this is called as Arambhavada. Even the Ajivikas, the Jainas, the Charvakas, all of them subscribe to this view. The second is Sanghatavada, which asserts that separate existential factors create the individual and his external and internal environment by a process of Sanghata. Hinayana Buddhism will propound this theory. Third position is that of Vivartavada, Shankara Vedanta, where the one real Brahman remains ever unchanged and all transformations are an appearance, quite different in nature from the cause. Even the Mahayana thinkers maintain a similar view. And this final is the Parinamavada, which asserts that many is created out of the one by a series of real transformations. And this is the position of Yoga, Sankhya, and some of the older Vedanta schools. So the theories are of four types. One became many, or many became many. Neither one nor many, or one appears as many. One became many, or one appears as many. Many became many, and neither from many nor one. So these are the different theories of creation that is put forward by the different schools. But coming back, originally Prakriti is made up of three gunas, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. These gunas, having been in some way stimulated, catalyzed, or intelligized, vitalized by Purusha's presence, the gunas proceed to reconfigure themselves to produce a succession of entities, beginning with the most fine or subtle buddhi or mahat, and ending with the most gross panchabhutas. Ishvara Krishna also classifies them in four ways. See, Moola Prakriti Avikritihi, Mahadadyaha Prakriti Vikritayaha Sapta, Shodashakastu Vikaro, Na Prakritir Na Vikritihi Purushaha. This is what he says. See, the 25 principles can be categorized into four types. 25. If you add Purusha and Prakriti to the 23 evolutes, you get 25. They can be categorized into four types. Moola Prakriti, the fundamental Prakriti, also called as Avyakta, also called Pradhana. This is itself uncreated. It is Avikriti, which means it is not Vikara of anything else. Vikara means transformation. Prakriti is not itself a Vikara of anything else. It is one of the two fundamental principles in the Sankhya model, Purusha and Prakriti. So, Moola Prakritihi Avikritihi, it is Avikriti, but it gives rise to or manifests into the other principles. Maharadhyaha, Mahat, Ahankara, and the 5 Tanmatras, these 7 are called Prakriti Vikriti. They're both Prakriti and Vikriti. Maharadhyaha, Prakriti Vikritayaha, Sapta. See, Mahat, that is Buddhi, is an evolute of Prakriti and itself is the cause of Ahankara. Ahankara, an evolute of Mahat or Buddhi, is itself the cause of the Pancha Tanmatras and the 11 Indriyas, the sense organs, as in the Karmendriya, the Jnanendriya, and Manas. In the same way, the Pancha Tanmatras themselves evolutes of the Ahankara, they give rise to the Pancha Mahabhutas. So these 7 principles, Mahat, Ahankara, and 5 Tanmatras, are both Vikara, that is transformations of something, and so they are Vikriti, but they also give rise to something else. So they are Prakriti also. So they are Prakriti Vikritaya. The 11 Indriyas and the 5 elements, the Panchabhutas, these are all merely Vikara. They are not themselves creative. They don't further give rise to anything else. So they are only Vikritis. And the conscious Purusha, na Prakriti, na Vikriti, he just is. So Purusha simply is. And in front of him, in his presence, creation happens spontaneously. This is the reason that Sankhya is called Nirishvara, because it does not require a Nimitta Karana for creation. The presence of Purusha is sufficient. These ideas are found very much in the Upanishads also, the Chandogya, the Bradhanika, the Aitareya, the Kaushitaki. In the Kathopanishad, you have in almost similar terms, Indriyebhyah parahyartha, Arthebhyashcha param manaha, Manasastu para buddhir buddher atma mahan paraha, Mahataha param abhyaktam abhyaktat purushah paraha, Purushanat param kinchit sa kashtha sa paragati. Gita also has a code, almost in exact words, Indriyani paranyahu, Indriyebhyah param manaha, Manasastu para buddhir yo buddheh parakastu saha. So these ideas are reflected or found commonly in the ancient philosophical expositions. See, Purusha is sort of like Brahman of Advaita, but the difference is that Purusha is innumerable. There are many Purushas. There are as many Purushas as there are individuals. And another difference is that in Advaita, everything that you see is Brahman. But here, Prakriti is fundamentally different from Purusha. Again, please remember that Prakriti is not simply matter or nature. See, Buddhi or Mahat is an evolute of Prakriti. Buddhi is not matter, correct? See, in Sankhya, Mahat or Buddhi is composed of the finest Sattvaguna. It is capable of reflecting the Purusha, which alone is pure consciousness in this system. So knowledge or experience in day-to-day life is experienced through the medium of this complex of Mahat, Ahankara and Manas. When this complex of Mahat or Buddhi, Ahankara and Manas is affected by an object, internal or external, the Buddhi assumes the image of the object, and there's a modification of the Buddhi called Vritti, which occurs with the assistance of Ahankara and Manas. This Vritti, this modification, is capable of receiving the reflection of Purusha like a well-polished mirror. The Buddhi then becomes conscious and intelligent because of the reflection of Purusha. And this is the basis of experience. Ahankara, the sense of I, this Ahankara is also an evolute of Prakriti in the Sankhya model. It does not belong to Purusha. In Advaita, on the other hand, the sense of I, the Ahankara, is the only thing that leads you to Brahman. It is the only true signature of Brahman. So Shankaracharya says it's like the footprint. You can use the footprint to trace your way back. In Sankhya, it is part of Prakriti, fundamentally different from Purusha. So Manas, Jnanendriyas, none of these principles are in any obvious sense material. The nearest thing we get to matter among the Sankhya categories are the Panchabhutas. Okay, so there are difficulties in applying terms such as matter and nature to Prakriti and its manifestations. We have to be careful to specify the sense in which these terms are being used. I'll talk a little bit more about the 3 gunas of Prakriti, the Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. This concept is the contribution of the Sankhya model. It is a very useful concept. It is an amazing concept that has found application outside the Sankhya system also, primarily in Ayurveda. But in Sankhya, it's a very subtle concept, slightly different from how it is currently or popularly understood. See, first, Sattva. There are several references to Prakasha in relation to Sattva. It sort of indicates that this guna concerns a thing's power to be seen or known. So Professor Radhakrishnan also, his assessment of Sattva was very similar. He said that Sattva is the tendency to manifestation. The most literal translation of Sattva is, of course, beingness. In this light, Sattva can be defined as the quality of manifestability, the capacity of a thing to become apparent or to contribute toward the becoming apparent of a thing. See, it makes some sense that the categories of manifest Prakriti are imbued with this quality because they're not themselves appearances. The conditioning factor that makes appearances and experience possible is this Sattva. So, according to Sankhya and Yoga, Prakriti is unmanifest, correct? Independently of Purusha. But because Purusha is present to Prakriti beginninglessly, so Prakriti's independent unmanifestness cannot be seen or understood in any concrete way. But if we consider the other two gunas, namely Rajas and Tamas qualities such as stability, inertia, limitation, boundedness, whereas Rajas is the opposite qualities, the instability, mobility, expansiveness, unboundedness. See, Professor Davies, he said with Rajas that it is rather the cause of an impetus than the impetus itself, the moving force rather than the motion. I think this is right. It is the capacity to move, the energy that makes the action possible. See, anything that was completely static, immobile, or inert could not manifest. The manifestation itself requires some kind of impulse or drive. But if there's no check on such an impulse, nothing to constrain and delimit it, then the motion is at risk of increasing towards infinite velocity in no specific direction or in all directions at once. So this is where tamas enters the picture. It being precisely the delimiting tendency that prevents disintegration and gives any manifest entity the cohesion that must be in place if it is to manifest at all. Surprisingly enough, this question of what the gunas are has never been satisfactorily addressed by any of the early thinkers. It was Vijnana Bhikshu who, as late as the 16th century, he gave importance to this topic in the first critical examination discussion occurs in his works. See, these are very subtle concepts. They require a different platform to discuss than a public forum. But the thing is, there are some problems in the way that this philosophy has been explained. It has not been explained very clearly. There's no explanation of why Mahat, that is Buddhi, that is awareness or discernment, why is this the first product of unmanifest Prakriti? How or why does it give rise to Ahankara? How does Ahankara give rise directly or indirectly to the other 21 principles? Prakriter maha sato hankaras tasmad ganashcha shodashakaha tasmadapi shodashakat panchabhyaha panchabhutani. From Prakriti Mahat, from that Ahankara, from that the group of 16, from 5 of those 16, the 5 bhutas. This is all that the shloka says. Most translators of this shloka tend to insert additional words. From Prakriti issues Mahat. From this issues self-consciousness, Ahankara. From which proceeds the set of 16. From 5 of these 16 proceed the 5 cross elements. These words, issues, proceeds, this is not there in the original shloka. So it's not very clear from the primary sources how exactly creation occurs. And see, the function of the Ahankara in the evolution process is much more complicated than that of the Pradhana or the Mahat. I remember a scholar who commented that by itself, Ahankara creates the whole phenomenal world, not in successive evolution, but immediately. It is literally far of the world, but its ways are mysterious. These are his words, of course. Professor M. Hiriyanna argues that we can assume a cosmic Purusha. and regard that the whole process of evolution as presented to him, to the cosmic Purusha, then Ahankara will stand for the sense of selfhood that arises in him. But the problem is that Sankhya itself does not posit a cosmic Purusha. It posits innumerable Purushas. It argues for the plurality of Purusha, and you cannot explain many other things if you take Purusha to be cosmic Purusha. So there are certain problems in this philosophy, which is why Shankaracharya had many arguments against it. He considered Sankhya as the Pradhanamalla, very important opponent. Important because it is a very important school of philosophy. It has influenced our tradition so much. Much of our thinking, our ideas comes from it, whether we know it or not. So we look into a little bit about how Kaivalya is understood in the system of Sankhya. According to Sankhya, the whole play of life, of Prakriti, is for the sake of the Purusha. Vatsa vivruddhi nimittam kshirasya yatha pravrittirajnasya Purusha vimoksha nimittam tatha pravritti pradhanasya. Yatha pravrittihi ajnasya kshirasya vatsa vivruddhi nimittam, the way milk, which is insentient, ajnasya kshirasya, the flow of insentient milk, is for the growth of the calf. Vatsa vivruddhi nimittam. Similarly, pradhanasya pravrittihi, purusha vimoksha nimittam. The pravritti of prakriti is for the purusha to attain liberation. So there is no Ishvara, no creator in Sankhya. Creation occurs in the mere presence of Purusha for the sake of Purusha, and creation ceases to be when Purusha sees himself as who he is. Rangasya darshayitva nivartate nartaki yatha nrityat Purushasya tathatmanam prakashya vinivrittate prakritihi. So just as a dancing girl ceases to dance after having exhibited herself to the spectators, so also Prakriti ceases to operate after having exhibited herself to Purusha. The Sankhya Karikas get very poetical about this. Prakriतेः सुकुमारतरं न किञ्चित् अस्ति इति मे मतिर्भवति या दृष्टास्मि इति पुनर्दर्शनमुपैमि पुरुषस्य. See, there's nothing more sukumara, tender and bashful than Prakriti. When she realizes that she has been seen by Purusha, never again will she enter into Purusha's sight. See, in the Sankhya model, Purusha is ever free, never bound, na badhyate, na muchyate, na api samsarati kaschit. It is Prakriti which is bound, Prakriti which attains release, samsarati badhyate, muchyate, nanashraya Prakriti. So when Purusha recognizes this truth, that I am not, nothing is mine, this is not I, nasme, name, naham itya parishesham, then the true knowledge, absolute knowledge will set Prakriti free. You have to remember that it is Prakriti who is bound, so it is Prakriti who is going to attain moksha in this system. Purusha is changeless, eternal, omnipresent, innumerable. In the Sankhya model, what reincarnates is also the subtle body that is made up of buddhi, ahankara, the 11 indriyas and the tanmatras. Okay, this complex, this called as antahkarana, this is Prakriti. It appears to be a conscious entity because of Purusha. So it is here that the samskaras, vasanas of karma, etc. are stored. And it is this antahkarana that transmigrates until the wrong identification of Purusha and Prakriti ceases to be. When Purusha realizes who he is, the supply of consciousness to Prakriti is cut off in a sense. And therefore the play comes to an end. So you can see that the ideas are similar to Advaita Vedanta. I mean, there are fundamental differences between the two systems, but there are echoes of similar ideas. Okay, so when Purusha sees himself as who he is, Prakritim pashyati Purushaha prekshavat avasthitaha svachchaha. He remains as a witness, pure and at ease. He beholds Prakriti, which ceases from manifestations, from evolution. Okay, and Drishtametyupekshaka eko Drishtaham ityuparamatya. See, Purusha thinks she has been seen by me. Therefore, he loses all interest. Prakriti thinks I have been seen and therefore ceases to act further. Sati sanyogepi tayoho prayojanam nasti sargasya. Even if there is a connection, there is no prayojana of further creation, further sarga. This is how Kaivalya is explained in the Sankhya model. See, Sankhya also sort of touches upon what may be understood as Jivan Mukti. Tishtati samskara vashat chakra bhramivat Rita Sharira. There you have Samyak Jnanadhigamat Dharmadinam Akarana Praptau Tishtati Samskaravat Vashat Chakra Bhramivat Dhrita Shariraha. Like the wheel of a potter's wheel, which continues to revolve even after the potter ceases his efforts at revolving the wheel. The momentum of the past impulse, so the body continues, the Purusha continues to be invested with the body for a while until Prapte Sharira Bhede, until there is, in the course of time, there is separation from the body. This is the Sankhya model. But again, there are a few problems that have not been completely addressed or convincingly addressed in the system. See, if the manifestations of Prakriti are real in the sense of being out there, that is the world that we see, that we wake up to. If this is real, then how does it dissolve for the Kaivalya? Either the manifestations do not really dissolve at all, but merely disappear from the view or awareness of the liberated Purusha. The true self, as it were, withdraws his gaze from them and becomes absorbed within his being. Or the manifestations are critically dependent upon the absence of self-knowledge of Purusha. And therefore, when the self-knowledge arises, the manifestations no longer exist in relation to that Purusha, even though they continue to do so for others. These are the two possible explanations, but both have serious difficulties. It's not a very convincing model. So it's fine for you and me to talk, to speculate. We can sort of intuitively understand what is trying to be said here. We can make sense of it. But when you're trying to create a formal system of philosophy, then there needs to be more rigor, more clarity, looser explanations that don't allow for more questions or give rise to more questions. So within the Sankhya theory, the method of attaining Kaivalya, the sadhana, has also not been expounded. A very cursory mention of Viveka through contemplation, discrimination. This is what is offered in the texts. When in the Nyaya Vaisheshika text, for example, there is no elaborate discussion on the sadhana, how to attain Kaivalya. But I think the model proposed by the Yoga Darshana is more complete, more fleshed out, more beautifully laid out. See, popularly, Sankhya and Yoga are understood as two sides of the same coin, the theoretical and practical aspects of the same philosophy. It is said that Yoga Sutra takes for granted the 25 categories of Sankhya as the basis of its doctrine. And the only difference between Yoga and Sankhya is the acceptance of Ishvara by the Yoga school and its denial by Sankhya. So Yoga is often called as Seshvara Sankhya, and Sankhya itself is called as Nirishvara Sankhya. I think this is a misrepresentation and doesn't do full justice to Yoga. Yes, the two systems are very much alike, but there are some significant differences which warrant our calling Yoga as a separate system of philosophy. Yoga is not Sankhya plus Ishvara, and Sankhya is not Yoga minus Ishvara. See, the most significant difference is that Yoga deals first and foremost with the human psyche, and our inner world parallels the structure of the cosmos itself, the Pindanda, equal to the Brahmanda, composed of the same fundamental layers that compose the hierarchy of the external world. So the model put forward by Patanjali is really a map, a psychocosmogram. This is the word that was first used by George Stein. I really resonate with this idea that the idea of psychocosmogram. It's a guide to both the inner and the outer universe. The principal purpose of the model, of course, is to point beyond the levels of or layers of the psyche and the cosmos to the self, which is held to be utterly transcendental. But Patanjali's model provides yogis with a map that allows them to traverse the different levels of existence until the moment of liberation. So this psycho-cosmological map put forward by Patanjali is profoundly informed by the territory that I think he discovered in the course of his own explorations in the vast dimension of consciousness inside, correlated to the dimensions of the cosmos outside. But on the other hand, Ishvara Krishna's map, the Sankhya model, gives an impression of being having been sketched on the basis of theoretical considerations only. Of course, I'm no authority on this, but suffice to say that there are significant differences in the system we will see in the course of this talk. I'll outline the basic principles of the Yoga Sutras. Everybody is, of course, familiar with the fact that the basic text of yoga is the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, dated to approximately the 2nd century CE. Tradition identifies him with the famous grammarian Patanjali, who wrote the Mahabhashya. This identification was first made by Bhojaraja in the 11th century CE in his Rajamartanda. Many academicians, S.N. Dasgupta, T.S. Rukmani, they date the text of Yoga Sutra to 2nd century BC and the 1st century AD. If you date it like this, the possibilities are available in the sense you can identify Patanjali of Yoga Sutras with Patanjali of the Mahabhashyas. But many other scholars state that the content and terminology of the Yoga Sutras suggest 2nd century CE as the probable date for Patanjali. This date will not allow for identification with the author of the Mahabhashya. Of course, Indian tradition knows of several other Patanjalis. The name is mentioned as the Gotra of the Vedic Rishi Asarayana. Shatapada Brahmana mentions Patanjala Kavya. There's a Sankhya Acharya by this name whose views are mentioned in the Yukti Deepika. Another Patanjali credited with Yoga Darshana. Then there's a Yogacharya Patanjali, part of the South Indian Shaiva tradition associated with Nataraja, Chidambaram. Also is well known the legend that Patanjali is an incarnation of Ananta, Adishesha. So Adishesha desired to teach yoga on earth and fell upward from heaven onto the palm Anjali of a virtuous woman named Bhumika. So he's called as Patanjali. So at the beginning of the Yoga Bhashya, the commentary to the Yoga Sutras, Mangalacharana is an address to Adishesha. Yatyakva rupam adyam tadhavati jagato nikadhag anugrahaya Prakshina Klesha Rashir Vishama Vishadharo Nekavaktah Subhogi. So it was a very beautiful verse. You also know this, of course, but Yoga Sutra consists of about 195 sutras. Some editions have 196. They're distributed over 4 chapters: the Samadhi Pada, the Sadhana Pada, Vibhuti Pada, and Kaivalya Pada. See, the ontology of classical yoga has 3 major foci: Ishvara, Purusha, and Prakriti. Ishvara, Purusha, and Prakriti. I'll take up each of these for consideration separately. Word Ishvara, derivative of the word Isha. Patanjali defines Ishvara in this way: Klesha karma vipakashayai aparamrishtaha purusha vishesha Ishvara. Ishvara is a special self. Purusha Vishesha. Aparamrishtaha, untouched by klesha, that is causes of affliction, by karma, action, by vipaka, the fruits of karma, and samskara. He is not touched by any of these afflictions. In the Yoga and Sankhya model, the entire spectrum of existence is analyzed into 2 primary modalities: self, Purusha, and Prakriti, non-self. Purusha embodies the principle of pure awareness. Prakriti is the womb of all creation. Obviously, Ishvara cannot be included in the category of Prakriti. So, Ishvara has been included in the category of Purusha. But he is Purusha Vishesha. Okay, Vishesha Purusha. We saw yesterday that this is exactly how Nyaya also defines Ishvara as Guna Vishishtam Atmantaram, a special type of Atma. His separateness from Purusha is explained in negative terms. He is unaffected by the modifications which the ordinary Purusha is subjected to. Ishvara at no time forsook or will forsake his perfect condition of transcendence. Because of his Naishkarmya, no vipaka, no karma phala ever accrues to him, and for the same reason he is not subjected to the klesha, which is part and parcel of phenomenal existence. Patanjali, though he makes a certain distinction between Purusha and Ishvara, he does not make a radical enough distinction to be able to speak of Ishvara as a wholly separate category. Actually, he does not really concern himself with the number of fundamental categories of the world at all. On the contrary, his model can be regarded as a decisive break with this numerative trend of the other schools. Everybody look to categorize the world, objects of the world. Patanjali's is a fundamentally different approach altogether. He defines Ishvara in a positive way also. Tatra niratishayam sarvabijam purveshamapi guruhu kalena navachchedat tasya vachakaha pranavaha tanjapastadartha bhavanam. Ishvara is sarvabijam, the seed of omniscience. His niratishaya is unsurpassed. Purveshamapi guruhu, he was the teacher of the previous yogis also since kalena anavachchedat. There is no temporal limitation for him. He transcends time. Tasya vachakaha pranavaha. His signature is the pranava, the omkara. Tadjapastadartha bhavana. The recitation of that pranava leads to the realization of its meaning. See, the sadhaka must emulate Ishvara's condition. This is the idea implicit in the concept of Ishvara pranidhana, a channeling of your emotive cognitive life to Ishvara by trying to simulate his unconditioned nature. So you sort of pretend to be Ishvara until you become Ishvara. Fake it till you make it kind of a thing. For the purpose of this imitation, the yogi symbolizes Ishvara in the form of pranava, the sacred omkara. The Bhashakara points out that this symbolization is not due to convention. It's the connection between Ishvara and omkara is inherent. It is permanent. The omkara is the experience, not an arbitrary label. It's the true symbol of Ishvara, charged with its power, experienceable in deep meditation. Okay? The sign of the omnipresence of Ishvara as manifest on the level of sound. Access to this experience is gained through japa, the vocal or silent recitation of the omkara. So our voice literally employed to reproduce a sound which is continually recitated by or recited by the universe itself. This idea is sort of the basis of Nada Yoga also. But Om is both the instrument and the goal. This is the reason why scholars like Mircea Eliade proposed that Ishvara is an experience, not simply a theoretical postulate in the yogic model. Anyway, this is the basic, superficial at best understanding of Ishvara. Idea of Purusha. See, it is interesting that Yoga and Sankhya use the term Purusha instead of Atman, which is more popular in the other philosophical system. See, in the Mahabharata, Purusha is defined as Pureshete, he who lies Shete in the Pura, citadel of the unmanifest Prakriti. Patanjali does employ this term Purusha, but very few times. He uses synonyms of this word more often, such as Drashtra, Swamin, Grahitra, Drikshakti, Drishi, Drishimatara, Prabhu, Chiti, Chiti Shakti, Para. These synonyms help to convey the full idea, the complete idea of what Purusha is understood as. Purusha stands in no conceivable relation to the composite world of phenomena. Purusha is sheer awareness as opposed to awareness of something, awareness of an object. Okay, and in this respect, he's exact opposite of Prakriti, which is by definition insentient. So the Purusha is considered as the authentic being of man. He is the drashtra of the ongoing mental processes or vrittis, and as long as vrittis are operating, Purusha's true transcendental identity is obscured. The shifting identification with the discontinuous states of experience, I am this sensation, I am that thought. This continuous process of constructing false identities is known as asmita. Asmita is
The false identification, it is caused because of avidya and is responsible for the whole inner world, the motivation, the desire, the response pattern. I'll come back to this later in the section of Mithya Jnana. But properly speaking, Purusha is neither Kartru nor Bhoktru of the experience which occurs in the mind. The involvement, the sanyoga with the thoughts and emotion is merely an apparent one. It is not real. So the sanyoga between, as long as the sanyoga between self and world continues, there is dukkha. So root of this sanyoga is avidya, and it is this avidya that must be terminated. How? By viveka khyati. I'll come to this in the section on sadhana. One question remains, is Purusha one or many? Sankhya model without doubt proposes the plurality of Purusha. Ishvara Krishna writes, Janma Marana Karananam Pratiniyamat Yugapat Pravutteshcha Purusha Bahutvam Siddham. This is the Karika. I don't remember exactly, but very clear terms he states, Purusha Bahutvam Siddham. This is his clearest terms, that he is arguing for the plurality of the self. I don't remember the Karikas very well, please forgive me. But the classical commentators of Yoga Sutras assume that Patanjali has also believed in the existence of many Purusha. But nowhere in the Yoga Sutra itself is this very clearly stated. There's only one sutra which is used to infer the plurality of Purusha. Kritarthanam prati nashtam api anashtam. This is the sutra that is used to infer plurality of self. It means that although the objective world has ceased for the one who has achieved or attained Kaivalya, it does not cease altogether because it is common to other empirical self. This is the sutra. But it is difficult to conclude based on only one sutra. There are no other ideas to support this position in the Yoga Sutras. It is just as possible that Patanjali admitted the existence of a single Purusha like Brahman. If that is true, then this system comes closest to Advaita. But that said, whatever his position may have been, doesn't matter in the sadhana. One Purusha or many Purusha, the sadhana remains valid. Because the process of realization always unfolds in the arena of duality. The witnessing consciousness has to confront the play of nature in the form of body and mind. Patanjali's absolute difference from Advaita tradition is his insistence on the absolute separateness of Purusha and Prakriti. Although this position is not philosophically attractive, I do think that this dichotomy is of considerable practical relevance. We'll see this again. I'll talk a little bit about how Prakriti is understood in the Yoga Sutras. See, I'm using the word Prakriti, but this is not a word that Patanjali himself uses many times. The idea is similar to the Sankhya model. Of course, it is the primal source or the womb, the yoni, from which issues the multiform universe. It is the creative matrix which holds in itself everything, but itself being unbounded. But Patanjali uses other synonyms like drishya, grihya, alinga. Alinga is the most common term that he uses, alinga, for Prakriti. So, drishya is also a very common term that he uses. It covers both the unmanifest and the manifest aspect of Prakriti. It is drishya. It signifies anything that is capable of becoming the object for the Purusha. Interestingly, he has used the word Prakriti whenever he has used the word Prakriti. It's about 3 times in the entire Yoga Sutras. But whenever he has used it in the plural form. Prakritinam. This is how he employs the term. So the idea is that the suggestion is of 3 ideas. A, the unmanifest dimension. B, the object, the physical, the universe as we see today. And 3, the subject, the psychic aspect. On the one hand, there's the undifferentiated, unmanifest matrix of Prakriti, also called Alinga. This is equal to the Avyakta or Pradhana of Sankhya model. On the other, there's the entire realm of the multitudinous phenomena of existence, which is not simply the visible universe, it also embraces the hidden dimension impervious to the senses, but experienceable in yogic introspections also. This inner or subtle, sukshma aspect of Prakriti can be called as the deep structure, in contrast to the surface structure, that is the visible world. In the model proposed by Patanjali, both the outer surface structure of the universe is covered as well as the deep structure of the mind, of the psyche is covered. So this model serves as a map to the yogi in his sadhana of conscious involution. See, Patanjali proposes 4 levels or parvans of manifestation of the 3 gunas. This is the model that is proposed by Patanjali, significantly different from the Sankhya model. See, Vishesha Vishesha Linga Matra Lingani Guna Parvani. This is the sutra of manifestation. Alinga, Linga Matra, Avishesha and Vishesha. 4 levels. Parva. This is Parva is the level. 4 levels of manifestation. This is different to the Sankhya model in a sense that it is not an evolutionary model. Patanjali's 4-level model is a structural view of the universe, outside and inside, constituted by the gunas. It is not meant to explain the actual evolutionary process in which the tattvas emerge from Prakriti. In fact, Patanjali does not refer to tattva evolution at all. Okay, so we'll explore this model further. To begin with is the concept of alinga, which means that which is without linga. Linga is mark or sign. We differentiate. It is equivalent to Prakriti of Sankhya model in its undifferentiated, unmanifest state as the matrix of the cosmos. Okay, the Avyakta. From this ultimate substrative cause, Alinga derives the first of the series of views, namely Linga Matra, the differentiated. See, the Linga Matra is the direct source of all further differentiation of the undifferentiated Prakriti. Linga Matra itself has but a single characteristic, which is existence. Nothing more can be said about this than that it exists. It is non-differentiated existence. This state of being only. It is the level of pure non-functional existence. The only operation that may be said to possess is the self-differentiation in the following evidence. It is what is Hiranyagarbha or Prajapati in the Upanishads. It is not buddhi, which in Patanjali's terminology stands only for cognition, not for any ontological entity. The third level, the third parvan is known as avishesha, the unparticularized. According to Vyasa, the comment of Bhashyakara, it is an umbrella term that covers asmita matra and the sense and the set of 5 tanmatras. Okay, asmita matra and 5 tanmatras. See, there's 2 terms, asmita matra and asmita. The 2 are different. Asmita matra corresponds to something of ahankara. It is the universal principle of individualization. The Bahusyam in Chandogya and all, this is what it refers to. Whereas asmita, not asmita matra, asmita denotes the particularized I amness. So distinction is made between the cosmological and psychological use of this very important term. See, asmita matra is the source of the multiple individualized minds. Asmita, on the other hand, is a function of each mind. So the introduction of this special technical designation does away with much of the ambiguity connected with the term ahankara in Sankhya, because there's no differentiation there between the individual ego consciousness and the cosmic ego consciousness. There's no difference there, but here there's a difference. There is asmita matra and asmita. And the 4th level, the 4th parvan, level of particularized phenomena or vishesha, it's called as vishesha, the surface structure of Prakriti. Okay, this is the 4th level. This is the model of Patanjali, proposed by Patanjali. I'm just going to look at what the cause is now. We already know that Purusha is of the nature of pure, unmitigated awareness, the power of awareness. Sanyoga between Purusha and Prakriti is unreal. It is not real. So why does this Sanyoga occur? Patanjali proposes the idea of kleshas, okay, because of kleshas. He distinguishes 5 types of kleshas: avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, and abhinivesha. Each category is very carefully defined, and avidya is explained as the nurturing ground for all the other types of kleshas. Okay. See, it's defined as anitya, 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 ashuchi, dukkha, anatmasu, nitya, shuchi, sukhatma, khyātir, avidya. Avidya is the false perception of the permanent in the impermanent, pure in the impure, joyfulness in the sorrowful, self in the not self. This is avidya. It goes hand in hand with false identity, that is asmita bhava. Rit darshana shaktyor ekatma eva asmita. It is the seeming identity of the drig and the darshana, the self, drig and the vision, whatever is seen, the identity between the two is what is called as asmita. The wrong identification gives rise to raga and dvesha, attachment and aversion. And the last is abhinivesha, which is the will to live. It is the powerful thirst for life, the survival instinct, which Patanjali says, vidushopi tatharudha, as in it is rooted even in the sage. Okay, so these kleshas provide the dynamic framework of the internal mental processes. They urge us to burst into activity, to feel, to think, to want, and as a basic emotional and motivational forces, they lie at the root of all the dukkha. So long as man lives out of a false identity in ignorance of his essential nature as Purusha, he remains subject to sorrow and suffering. So what is the way out of it? See, because the mind represents a system of dynamic forces in the yogic model. There's the manas, there's the asmita, which is the focal point of the internal processes. There's also the deeper structure formed by the depth memory as the storage center of all the past mental activity. Not, of course, confined to this particular existence, but extends backwards infinitely. Now, consciousness is energized by this network of forces which set up a certain tension and cause the mind to incline towards the sensory experience. Externalization, in turn, leads to the formation of samskara, which reproduce themselves through fluctuations. So the first and foremost task of the yogic process is to intercept this cycle by the gradual introversion of consciousness. It's called as pratyak chetana. By refusing these forces an outlet, their power is checked by sensory withdrawal and the stilling of mind. So the yogi literally plays the forces off each other by not allowing them to take effect in the conscious mind. He indirectly achieves their mutual annihilation. It's like a grinding stone. If there's no grain and the grinding continues, it grinds itself away for the lack of grain. So according to yoga, even the last samskara has to be exterminated. Only then will the klesha can be said to be fully destroyed. Okay. So how to do this? The yogic path as formulated by Patanjali appears to be a bipolar process of gradual internalization. All the techniques can be put under 2 categories, abhyasa and vairagya. In modern terminology, the abhyasa may be conceived as a process of canalization, of reconditioning, while vairagya may be seen as a process of deconditioning. So by breaking the association between the motives, the goals of lower level psychological development by a process of deconditioning, and then forming new association between motives and higher goals through a process of reconditioning, you gradually rise from the lower to the higher levels. See, Vyasa, this is Bhashyakara Vyasa's illustrates the functional interdependence of abhyasa and vairagya. Chitta nadi namo, Bhayato Vahini, Vahati Kalyanaya, Vahati Papaya. The stream of consciousness flows in both directions, flows to the good, it flows to the bad. Yatu Kaivalya Pragdhara, Viveka Vishayamna, Sa Kalyana Vaha. The one which starts with Viveka and finishes in Kaivalya is the Kalyana Vaha, flows to the Kalyana. Samsara Pragdhara, Aviveka Vishaya Nimna Papa Vaha. The one that starts with lack of discernment, aviveka, finishes in samsara, is the papavaha. Tatra vairagyena vishaya srotaha khilikriyate. Through vairagya, the flowing out to the sense objects is checked. Khilikriyate is to render powerless, to weaken. Okay. Viveka darshanabhyasena viveka srota udghatyata iti ubhayadhinaha chitta vritti nirodha. The practice, that is abhyasa, and through the practice of abhyasa and of the viveka and the stream of discernment is laid bare. The viveka as the abhyasa and vairagya, the chitta vritti nirodha, is dependent on both the abhyasa as well as vairagya. Yet the actual method of sadhana as laid out in the yogic model is the pratyahara, dharana, dhyana and samadhi. This is the exact steps that have been laid out in the yogic model. Pratyahara, as you can see, is you disunite the senses from their respective objects. This is the first step. Once the focus of attention narrows to a strictly confined locus, the awareness of the surroundings is gradually lost. See, in yoga, of course, complete cessation of all sensory activity is aimed at, which is facilitated by asana and pranayama. But the first step is to withdraw all the senses from the objects of the senses. This induces the dharana, which is characterized by Patanjali as Deshabandhascha Chittasya Dharana. Concentration is the binding of consciousness to a single locus. The technique consists in focusing of attention, a mental zeroing in on one topic to the exclusion of all others. It is also called as Ekatattva Abhyasa. The general shrinking of the mind, leaving only a smaller portion of concentrated mental activity. So the center of attention, the locus of concentration, can be different objects as long as they are properly imperialized. The preferred loci, Patanjali mentions Nadhi Chakra, he mentions Kanthakupa, the Kurma Nadi, the heart. He gives other options like Surya, Chandra, Dhruva Nakshatra. He gives purely conceptual items like Maitri, Bala, etc. In addition, there's the recitation of the japa of Omkara, signifying Ishvara. See, when you come to the meditative absorption or dhyana, the one slowness of the presented ideas, this is the literal rendering of the pratyayikatanata. Okay? A linear continuation of ekagrata is achieved by the technique of dharana. So while in dharana, the mind remains bound up, as it were, in a restricted place. Its continuation in that bound up state in such a way that the experiential state remains uniformly and homogeneously the same despite variations in internal or external situation. This constitutes the dhyana, the continuation of that state is what is called as dhyana. See, in the state of dhyana, the mind remains unaffected by the distracting stimuli. It can be understood as a deepened and creative dharana, okay, in which, see, although I don't speak from experience, but it has been so well explained or described in the texts, the object that has been zeroed in on, the inner object, is illumined mentally, okay. The strict concentration on one object of consciousness is now supplemented with a searching, pensive contemplation of its actual nature. The object is placed before the contemplative consciousness, and in all its aspects, it is perceived as a whole. The various characteristics are examined till its very essence is understood. The essence of the object is understood, and that becomes transparent. See, it's actually very interesting in a sense. You must absolutely read about the deep connection between yoga and Indian art. It is so well written by Ananda Kumaraswamy. You absolutely have to read this. He says that the Indian artist never tried to imitate nature as it is. A lotus that he carves in a temple is not supposed to be the lotus that you see in the lake. The artist sat down for dhyana, saw the image that he wished to make in dhyana, and then tried to depict what he saw onto a suitable material. This idea is found throughout our tradition. The opening verses of Valmiki's Ramayana, he says, Tatah pashyati dharmatma tat sarvam yogamasthitaha purayat tatra nivrittam pano amalakam yatha. See, although Valmiki was already familiar with the story of Rama, before composing his own Ramayana, he sought to realize it more profoundly. So he sat himself with his face towards the east. He sat down in yoga contemplation of his theme, and by virtue of dhyana, he clearly saw before him Rama, Lakshmana, Sita, and Dasharatha. In dhyana, Valmiki saw all that had come to pass, like an amla fruit on the palm of his hand. If the way you can see a fruit kept on your hand, all sides of it. Panav amalakam yatha. The way you can see every aspect of it. This is how he saw the Ramayana happening in his dhyana. Having truly seen all of it through his concentration, then he began writing the history of Rama. Sarvam tatvato drashtva dharmena samhadyutihi abhiramasya ramasya charitam vartum udyataha. See, today when you read translations and interpretations, these very important clues are brushed away as poetry, as exaggerations, as sentimental narrations. But I think it is more useful to take it more seriously and more literally. If you're interested, Kumaraswamy is the place to go to. So dhyana, in other words, adds depth to dharana. Okay, it's a reconstruction of the consciousness, which further leads to samadhi. Okay, when, see, in samadhi, tadevarthamaptam nirbhasam swarupa shunyam iva samadhi. When nothing but the object is shining forth in that meditative absorption, and when the mind, as it were, is void of its own form, this is called as samadhi. So the passing from dhyana to samadhi, from contemplation to rapture, it takes place suddenly, almost unaware. It is spontaneous, as if uncaused. If all the preparations have been made correctly, it happens. So when all the contents have been cleared, even the awareness of pure existence is no longer present. Consciousness undergoes a total collapse. There's a gradual emptying of consciousness in the course of the samadhi journey. When it comes to the critical point where implosion occurs owing to the extreme evacuation of the mind, this is asamprajnata samadhi. See, initially, the asamprajnata samadhi is supposed to be only a fleeting experience, but through abhyasa, the yogi reverts again and again to it. See, this is not absence of consciousness, of course. It is an ultra-cognitive state that I don't know how to explain. But once the utmost boundary of this is reached, it is said that he is carried away as if by a powerful current towards Kaivalya. So the withdrawal of consciousness from the external world, its interiorization, localization by the means of practice of concentration, then dhyana, that is meditation, and finally samadhi. This opens up a new dimension of reality. The yogi gains access to a unique form of experiencing and knowledge which structures his entire being. This is sometimes described in terms of formation of a new subtle body with its own peculiar organs and capabilities. So the yogi is said to be capable of extraordinary powers, which is known as siddhis. Patanjali has devoted an entire section to the Vibhuti Pada. Vibhuti is the different powers, the siddhis which the yogi will acquire in his journey. It's a very long there's a lot of things to discuss in the Samadhi Pada, Vibhuti Pada also. The different siddhis are mental, they can be physical, they can be classified according to the cause, as in the siddhis that occur when yama and niyama are follow. When asana is mastered, so on and so forth. Each of it gives different powers. And ultimately, Kaivalya is the exact opposite of the Sanyoga. Okay. But see, it's a pseudo event in the yoga model, in a sense that Purusha is always free. He has never entered the mechanisms of Prakriti. So moksha is not strictly does not something that you attain. It's a pseudo event, exactly like that in Advaita. So this system does come closer to Advaita than any other systems, okay, where the one Brahman appears as the entire world. And when he realizes who he is, as in a sense that creation no longer exists for him. See, at the end, I can only say that all these theoretical constructs, the common themes remain, that there is suffering. The only way out of suffering is to realize who you are. And the first step towards it is Chitta Shuddhi. These are the very common steps that you will find in all of this. Even in Nyaya, we found that Mithya Jnana is what is causing the suffering of Atman, who is not real. It's not the real nature of Atman. Suffering is not real to Atman. This is exactly the Nyaya model also. Sankhya model, Yoga model also. The Purusha is ever free, but it seems to be undergoing the suffering. And this Mithya Jnana, this Avidya is what is supposed to be dissolved. Now, what the nature of Atman is, what the nature of Purusha is, what exactly is the nature of Avidya, these are more not exactly relevant for a sadhaka, because if the first step is Chitta Shuddhi, and most of us are in this very basic step, you do not need any high philosophy to be writing all this. This is Chitta Shuddhi, but this I think I've taken more time than I intended to. So I think I will end Sankhya and Yoga here. If there are any questions, I'll address them if you have any questions now. I did want to finish all the 6 darshanas, but not possible to take on all the questions together, which is why I sort of.
Thank you, Manjushri. Yet another enlightening and fascinating journey through the four of the 6 darshanas. 2 of them today. We are almost out of time. I think there are a few questions. You can perhaps take them quickly. The first is, if Prakriti cannot be translated as matter, what is a more suitable word in English that can capture the meaning better?
So, like I said, I like say creative womb, like the yoni, the womb of the entire creation, or creative matrix, or undifferentiated plenitude of being. Like all of these are like not exact translations, but approximation of the idea to convey the idea. So womb, the creative womb, I think, is closer than matter or nature. The problem with matter and nature is simply that the idea you get is, okay, this is the nature that you see, this is the idea of Prakriti that you get. So, which is not.
I think the nature we see, the Prakriti, is a product of the actual Prakriti we speak about, right?
The surface, as in the outermost evolute, is what you can call. What you see is the outermost evolute.
The next question is, can you suggest traditional works that give a clear picture of the Shad Darshanas?
See, actually, even if you look at all the like Shaddarshana, all the doxographies, if you look at any of them, the thing is, not every work presents the different darshanas in the exact way that they would have liked to have done it. In a sense that you have to go to their work to understand them, especially in the later like Sayana Madhaviya work. What happens is it appears as if the author is partial to Advaita, and therefore it's a sort of gradation. So it's a sort of hierarchical arrangement. So this is the sort of idea you get in the different lexicographies. I think it would be better to actually go to the source of each of them just to understand what they have to say, because each of them have developed different models, and these models have survived for centuries. These ideas are present throughout our tradition, and they're very important ideas. So it makes sense for you to understand the subtler concepts of what they actually meant to say than a very superficial understanding of it. It is useful, is what I think.
I have heard that Sayana's representation of other darshanas, despite disregarding the hierarchy he has given, they are quite, even the Charvaka school and all, he has quite honestly depicted. This is what I have read.
I'm not saying it's dishonest, but I'm saying that it doesn't go to very subtle aspects. See, for example, Vachaspati Mishra has commented on all the Shaddarshanas. He's written Bhashya for all the Darshana. But what happens, some of the ideas of one discipline is sort of taken over to the other. You will see that this is where I don't want to say misrepresentations, but this is where like a couple of confusions arises when the same person is talking about all of it. I'm just saying it's better to go to a person who believes in that particular discipline and has explained it. He will do a better job of explaining than a person who tries to attempt all of it. Like, I mean, the same thing applies to me. If I will be able to talk about Advaita better than I will ever be able to explain the Nyaya model. So,
Okay, nice. So we have two quick questions. Is there any classification like Nirishwara Sankhya and Saishwara Sankhya in Sankhya Darshana? Second is there any correlation between Sankhya Darshana and Sankhya Yoga mentioned in second chapter of Bhagavad Gita?
first question, see, Seshwara Sankhya and Nirishwara Sankhya, basically, Sankhya itself is called as Nirishwara Sankhya and Yoga is called as Seshwara Sankhya because it accepts Ishvara, whereas Sankhya model does not accept Ishvara as an. It does not, in the model, there's no requirement of Ishvara, that's just that. Therefore, it is called as Nirishwara Sankhya. Although in the later tradition of the Sankhya community itself, there is a little bit, say for example, Vijnana Bhikshu's explanations are little more theistic than the Sankhya Karika. So there are differences, of course, but the original distinction of Seshwara and Nirishwara is applicable to Sankhya and Yoga. The Sankhya and Yoga that is of Gita, etc. See, it's not exactly these systems that it is. Or see, in Gita, although in the Bhagavad Gita, the ideas are similar between Sankhya and Yoga. The ideas seem to be similar to what the two systems have now, the systems as that we know now. But these words, Sankhya and Yoga, have been used in earlier works also, in the Upanishads and all. We don't know if it refers to these systems because, see, there's so much of debate. For example, Dhruva Ramkha says that the word yoga does not refer to Patanjali yoga anyway, but it refers to Nyaya and Vaisheshika in some texts. So there is a lot of debate on this topic. There's not enough clarity about this topic. But in the Bhagavad Gita, you could take Sankhya as not the philosophical system as we know now, but the idea. See, Sankhya is like a rationalistic approach. Okay, Viveka is what will lead to, as in for you to end suffering. Viveka is the entire thing. But for yoga, it's a practical. It doesn't accept Viveka only as the cause of liberation. Viveka is not the only cause in yoga. It's a more it focuses more on the practice, the sadhana. It focuses on that. So in the Bhagavad Gita, when you're talking about Sankhya and Yoga, these ideas are definitely there. When Sankhya is used, it refers to the Jnana Marga, and Yoga does refer to the Abhyasa or Sadhana Marga. So that's, yeah.
Any good book on Sankhya that you would recommend that we can read?
T.S. Rukmini has, Professor T.S. Rukmini has done a lot of work on this. S.N. Das Gupta is very good. Um, yeah. Can't remember any other particular names.
Couple of more questions and we'll just quickly wrap it up. Does Sankhya have any thoughts on karma phala and rebirth? And is Patanjali's concept of Ishvara different from Dvaita's concept of Ishvara?
Okay. Yes, Sankhya has the idea of karma phala and rebirth. The only difference is that the entire thing, it's the antahkarana, okay, the complex of the buddhi, mahat, ahankara, manas. All the vasanas are stored in this, and it's sort of like this Purusha is there watching, and the entire play is happening on its own. Suddenly, when he realizes that what am I watching for to stop, kind of a thing. So we're not talking about Purusha himself undergoing rebirth. We are saying that Prakriti is undergoing rebirth. So the moksha is also for Prakriti. It is not for Purusha in Sankhya Yoga, in Sankhya model. So it's little different, say, from Advaita, where the Purusha is as in the self, Jivatman is who is who appears to enjoy the fruits of karma. The second question was, I forgot.
Patanjali's concept of Ishvara and versus in Dvaita Vedanta.
See, in Patanjali's system, Ishvara almost seems unnecessary in a sense that he's not the nimitta karana, he is not upadana karana, he is a special type of Purusha. Okay, the use of Ishvara in the yoga system seems to be only for Ishvara pranidhana as a postulate for sadhana. See, honestly speaking, yoga model, like I explained, is a very experiential model. The moment you sit for sadhana, when you start sort of involuting the mind insides, these are the levels that you will encounter, kind of a thing. So Ishvara is also a sort of level that you will encounter, is what I want to say. It's not an exact, I'm not able to convey the exact idea, but Ishvara is not like that of Dvaita. Ishvara in other systems like Dvaita, where even in Nyaya, you have Ishvara, who is also type of Atma, but he's the creator, as in he's the Nimitta Karana, at least there. Here, he is not anything. Okay, he's not the Nimitta Karana, he's not the Upadana Karana, he has no role to play as such, but he's for Ishvara Pranidhana, it is useful, and I think it's more an experience. It's in the yogic model. This is a very superficial way of saying it.
We'll take two more questions. One is Sankhya Ahankara, is it equivalent to Asmita or Asmita Matra in yoga? And please explain with respect to multiple or cosmic Purusha.
So see, this is what is the problem with Sankhya model. If you say that, if you don't accept a cosmic Ahankara, if you're saying that there is only individualized Ahankara, there's multiple, innumerable Purusha, okay, and Purusha, in front of Purusha, the Prakriti is manifesting, the creation occurs. Now what happens? Problem occurs because there's no differentiation between Asmita Matra and Asmita in the Sankhya model. Only the word used is Ahankara. Okay. Whereas in yoga, the difference occurs. There's a difference between Asmita Matra, which is the it's not individual ego per se, but what you can understand as the cosmic sense of selfhood. In Sankhya, because there is, like I said before, Professor M. Hiriyanna says that Sankhya model, instead of taking Purusha as individual Purusha, you can take it as cosmic Purusha. If that is taken like that, then a lot of things would make sense, but Sankhya itself does not accept this. It does not postulate a cosmic Purusha. It accepts only a plurality of Purushas as individual selves. This is how Sankhya itself understands it. So, Ahankara can be equated only to Asmita, not Asmita Matra. Ahankara seems to be more individual ego, which is what cannot quite be explained I mean, there's a little bit of problem in Sankhya theory.
Okay. Wonderful. Final question. It is Shakta Tantras. Can they be considered more theologically closer to Sankhya model, or they're more closer to Vedanta model?
See, I honestly feel that Shakta could have been included in the Darshanas. I don't know why it has not been. See, honestly speaking, says a system like Purva Mimamsa is not exactly a darshana in a sense of how the other darshanas function. The Purva Mimamsa is different. Instead of that, we could have had Shakta Tantra, is what I feel. Or one of the agamas. These could have been considered as one of the different darshanas. This does come closer to, I would say, Vedanta than any of these models. Um, Even yoga itself comes closer to Advaita, uh, in a lot of senses, it comes closer to Advaita. There are fundamental differences, but I think Shakta is more closer to Advaita than any other system.
But Shakta, I think, also put forward the Parinama Vada rather than the
Correct.
this one.
Correct. Again, like I said, if it's more of an experiential realm, is the model is more experiential, and that is what differentiates. Is what I feel. It's not a strict evolutionary model the way Sankhya or Nyaya is. And although the God is posited, like in yoga, how Ishvara is posited, I think it's more of an experiential reality than something that is absolutely necessary for the system itself.
Again, one more final question. A quick one. Is Charvaka the only darshana for Nastika?
See, like I said, this Astika and Nastika division happens at a very later stage. It's about after the 12th century is where you find this strict division of Astika and Nastika. Before that, this division that we understood is not there. Jaina and Buddha was also considered as Astika. And Sankhya Yoga was called as Nastika. You see how it is possible to call. I mean, it depends on what your definition of Astika and Nastika is. And also, like I told you in the last class about how even the acceptance of Veda is not uniform throughout these darshanas also. Okay, so Charvaka, in a sense, if by Nastika you mean only refusal to accept God, then Sankhya also qualifies. You're not accepting Ishvara in any sense of the word as a creator. But again, what exactly do you mean by Astika and Nastika is sort of, or how you define it is what the question will be. You can say, as in a sense, that do they not accept, they don't accept karma, they don't accept Atman in the way we understand it. For them, Sharira itself is the final. So I guess, yeah, I mean, in that sense, yeah, Charvaka is the only, or hedonists, I think Charvaka is the only Darshana.
Thank you, Manjushri. And we all have got richer in our knowledge by these
I hope not
four.
bored, that's all.
I don't think even 1 second was boring or lost. So we all became very much richer by this 4 hours of lecture, and I look forward to having you again on our platform. For those who asked about the video of these sessions, they will be uploaded on our YouTube channel, Advaita Academy YouTube channel, and our website in 2 to 3 days. And you can watch them. All our videos are available. We have more than 11,000 videos on YouTube channel on various aspects of Advaita Vedanta and Hindu philosophy in general as well. And if you need any details of email IDs of the Manjushri Hegde and all, please write to us on our Advaita Academy email ID, and we will share the details. With this, we come to yet another segment of Weekend with Wisdom. Thank you again, Manjushri, for coming and speaking for these 2 days. And we will soon announce the next session details. Watch our Twitter handle or our Facebook page for the announcements. Thank you again. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.